Now back to our top story and to Afghanistan, where pressure is mounting on the US to extend the deadline to evacuate Afghans fleeing the Taliban. US President Joe Biden is set to face requests at an emergency G7 meeting later to allow more time to evacuate thousands of people hoping to flee from the country as fears grow that time for the huge operation is running out. The Taliban has made it clear it will not allow any extension. Arise correspondent CROWTHER is in Islamabad, in neighboring Pakistan, where some fleeing Afghans have been flown to before carrying on their journeys to other countries. And he joins us now. Philip, good to see you. I hope you're keeping safe. Why has the 31st August deadline become such a problem?
Well, that date, first of all, was one that was essentially self-imposed by the United States, but it is also one that, of course, has since been agreed to by the new Taliban leadership in Kabul, meaning that any extension of that date, well, that would have to be agreed to by both parties as well. That is really the problem that the United States right now are finding themselves in. This was a date that was established, first of all, because the United States wanted, of course, you'll remember this, wanted to complete their withdrawal of all US troops by the 20th anniversary of the 11th of September, that date coming up very, very soon. Now, since the Taliban takeover in Kabul, that date has turned into the 31st of August because that is really the date when the United States wanted to be able to finish all their evacuations of Americans who were in Afghanistan, family members, also those who worked at the embassy, but then, of course, also Afghans who, over the past 20 years, have helped the US military on the ground. So that's a lot of people. And the truth is that it is becoming relatively clear now that it's close to impossible to actually pull that off. It might be possible for the United States to get all of their people, whatever that exactly means, whether that includes every Afghan who has ever worked for and with the United States in Kabul and in the rest of Afghanistan. We'll have to wait and see. They might all be able to get out, but will all other countries who are also taking part in these evacuation flights, will they be able to get all of their people out, their own citizens, but also, again, Afghans who worked with them, who might have worked for human rights organizations, or generally just Afghans who really feel like they need to get out because they don't feel safe in an Afghanistan that is controlled by the Taliban. All of those problems that will be mounting up day by day, and reasons why you'll be seeing increased urgency at the international airport in Kabul if a later date is not agreed upon. And again, that is something that maybe the other G7 countries will want to insist upon because they are, of course, also organizing evacuation flights from Kabul. But really, there has to be an agreement on the ground, and that is the problem. The United States is the country that has that agreement with the Taliban right now, and you already mentioned this. There has been a red line expressed by a Taliban spokesperson, that red line being it's the 31st of August. All evacuations will have to be done by then.
What chance do you think that the G7 will actually be able to come to an agreement? And worst case scenario, if they're not, what can you foresee happening?
Well, it's going to be a scramble if nothing happens. This is going to be a very, very tense situation on the ground, and it will really depend on the relationships that might have been established between the United States and the Taliban on the ground and other allied countries and the Taliban on the ground. Because imagine this situation. It just won't work if all US troops were to leave. For example, the 1,000 British troops who are also controlling accesses and controlling the airport in Kabul, they would not be able to keep control of that airport if the Taliban did not want them to. In other words, the United States is the country that will have to be making that decision. Now, pressure will be put on the United States intensely during this virtual meeting of G7 leaders. A G7 meeting that, by the way, is presided by Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, still having the presidency of the G7 countries. And there will be enormous pressure from all sides on US President Joe Biden to try and extend, again, that self-imposed deadline because, again, the British troops will not want to have complete control of the airport. And of course, the United Kingdom will want to get their people out first, and all other G7 member countries as well. That includes France, for example, Germany as well. They just need there to be an agreement for that date to be extended past the 31st of August. So I think chances are very, very high that there will be There will be increased pressure on the United States, of course, during this virtual meeting of G7 leaders, and it will also be a concerted effort by everybody other than the United States to convince them to do what the other countries want the United States to do.
Now, speaking of that August 31st self-imposed deadline by the U.S., what were the reasons that the U.S. maybe did not give more time in order to organize all of these things? And I know you spoke about it earlier, but what could possibly be the reasons why they rushed it if there more time could have been given?
Look, at the end of the day, what the United States wanted out of this and what the Biden administration wanted to do in Afghanistan for a long time now is get all U.S. troops out. It was a campaign promise from U.S. President Joe Biden, and it is something that he had promised as president that he would do, and he has said repeatedly that he stands by that decision. Of course, that changed somewhat from the initial aim to get everybody out by the 31st of August. That then turned into an emergency evacuation effort, but still one whereby the United States did want to get everybody, that is all U.S. troops. But before that, everybody who wanted or needed to be evacuated from Kabul, everybody would have to be able to get out before the exit of U.S. troops, because they are the ones, of course, organizing most of these evacuations. And again, they are the ones who have control over the international airport. If they don't have it, then you cannot see one single country taking over, or even a coalition of countries taking over control of the airport. That seems entirely unrealistic at this point.
Okay, Philip, we all have that date, August 31st. Penned into our diaries. But we keep hearing stories that seem to conflict with the assurances the Taliban is giving of calm and no need for fear. We're hearing stories of persecution. What stories are you hearing from the ground?
Yeah, there have been warnings, and the most stark one comes from the UN Human Rights Chief. That's Michelle Bachelet of Chile. She's the one who's put out a really stark warning of what could happen under the Taliban in Afghanistan, and she's the one who also is talking already about summary executions happening in Afghanistan right now. I would have to add, though, that we don't know where she has that information from and what the exact dates are of these executions that she says are happening right now. But the basics of this story of the Taliban control right now is that they have been putting up a PR offensive. It is as simple as that. They are trying to prove that they are a different Taliban from the one that had control still just about 20 years ago in Afghanistan. Of course, there are a lot of people who won't believe that at this point, especially those who have memories of what exactly it was like during Taliban-controlled Afghanistan back in the day. And of course, also with the lack of many journalists on the ground and the lack of information coming from other areas other than Kabul, we don't actually know at this point what Taliban control truly looks like in the rest of the country. Are they following the orders from Taliban commanders and spokespeople who are in Kabul right now? That we simply do not know. It is a situation where we'll have to wait and see what the Taliban will be like as a governing force in Afghanistan. And of course, it will be difficult to find out if the situation remains the way it is. But of course, one thing is very, very clear. There are many, many Afghans, tens of thousands, who believe that they would not be safe in a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. That explains, of course, the rush to the international airport in Kabul and just the simple fact that so many Afghans feel like now is the time to get out.
Okay, I don't know if you can answer this in less than a minute, but speaking of a new improved Taliban, are we hearing any more about the composition of a government?
Well, it's supposed to be an inclusive government, right, is what we've heard from Taliban spokespeople. They're not getting close yet. Do they want to include members of the past government? It would seem unlikely, but right now, according to statements, that is something that might just happen. Again, though, we should mention that when you see those scenes from the airport and when you hear from the United States wanting to evacuate as many people as possible by the end of the month, there is a very, very serious sense of urgency. And again, what that clearly shows is that there is no confidence in this upcoming Taliban government, or if it is to be an inclusive government that might even include women in high-ranking positions, we simply don't know. But there is no trust that this is going to be a government that is going to be anything like what Afghanistan has had over the last few years. People don't trust it, and that is why there is this rush to leave the country at this point.
All right, thank you so much for that, Philip Crowther, reporting live from Islamabad.